Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to Talk to Internal Audit, a dedicated Facebook live stream. I'm Jamieson, your host for today's episode, and it's all about data analytics and why it's just not negotiable now. We must do data analytics. To keep things interesting today, and not just have you listen to me for the next hour or so, I've got three guests today. Carolyn Derham, Group Head of Audit at Post, Kevin Goulding, Group Head of Audit at Dublin Airport Authority Group, and Shehryar Humayun, Audit Director at Lloyds Banking Group. Good afternoon to everybody. I'll introduce them all properly in a few minutes. As a break to our usual half hour or so streams, today we're going to actually go to an hour. This will increase your opportunity to earn CPE points. Usually the half hour session will give you half a point. Today we're doubling it and you can get 1 point. So good news if you're searching for CPE just now. Now, before we get into the detail on data analytics and talk to our guests, I just thought I'd give you two examples of data analytics from my past. My past is lengthy. I'm an old man now, and I've been doing internal audit since about 1990. A couple of examples. I used to work in a bank. We had a range of cash machines across the network. We had a problem with the cash machines. We seemed to be having more differences, more customer complaints, more missed dispenses. We couldn't work out what was going on in the organisation. In internal audit, we're asked to do a piece of analysis. Can you help us find out what controls are not working and what are the issues underneath all that? So a long time ago, we gathered together all the information we could get. We had data on downloads, we had data on spreadsheets, we had records of ATM engineers going to premises, we had customer complaints. And we did what we do nowadays, but we did it in a manual fashion. We collated it all and tried to work out what it was telling us. So we plotted it together and we compared notes with each other about what we were seeing. What we established was that within 60 minutes of an engineer attending an ATM, quite often a misdispense would take place or a customer complaint would arise as a result. What we then managed to do after a period of time is realise that the one ATM engineer out of the 12 or 13 we had was the common denominator. Every time he visited the place during the day, the evening, through the night, within about 60 minutes, we subsequently had a transaction that was complained about or a missed dispense. Outcome of all that, well, very simply, the engineer was jailed because he was committing fraud. And we revised several processes. So data analytics in operation around about 1991, but it took us weeks and weeks to get to the point on that. My other example is about customer complaints. We're undertaking an audit of customer complaints framework in the organisation. And particular for us was trying to give assurance that the organisation was getting to the root cause of customer complaints and wasn't just dealing with symptoms and refunding customers. And it was interesting, again, we got lots of data, all the information from customers, all the information from our complaints team. We went to branches, we talked to sales teams, etc., and gathered together lots of information. And we found that for one category of complaint, which was particularly high, we had a concentration of complaints coming from one sales team and from a couple of individuals with that sales team, which we thought was most interesting. By luck, because we had collated HR records as well, we actually realised that two of these individuals were actually highlighted for sales awards that year. By far and away the best salespeople we had in the organisation. And we undertook a little bit of an exercise to get underneath the detail there. And we found that in order to get the sales, they had actually been circumventing certain compliance requirements and therefore mis-selling to our customers. Outcome of that, well, you can imagine that these two people did not win the awards, and more justifiable award winners were given the awards, and we lost 2 members of staff for deliberate malpractice, if you like. Data analytics, probably 1999. So we've all been doing data analytics forever. Internal Audit has been doing this as part and parcel of what we do. So today's discussion really isn't about should we do data analytics. We always have. It's actually not negotiable. We have to do data analytics. What's changed over the last few years, particularly the last 2 or 3 years, is how you do data analytics and how much insight it gives you and how much more powerful data analytics is. And I guess today I'm not being critical, the top of the world in terms of data analytics. Nobody professes to be the best person in the world at data analytics. They're all on their own journeys, they're all in their own organizations, and they're all making significant progress in using data analytics in new in interesting ways. So hopefully what they tell you today will give you more inspiration about what to do yourselves, help you commit to doing something more in the future, something different, something better. And if you get that commitment and enthusiasm from this, I think we've done our job today. So, as I say, welcome to everybody. Welcome to Kevin, to Caroline, and to Shehryar. It is very much my pleasure to have all three people here today. Now, I haven't met everybody in the last year. Sorry, I've only met these three individuals in the last year or so, but I've been inspired by all three. They might blush, but I have, given I've only spoken to a couple of them once or twice, but I have. So I'm now going to turn to the individuals in question and start asking 3 or 4 questions this morning, which, as I say, hopefully gives you some understanding of where they're coming from, what they're doing, and what's next. Kevin, I'm going to begin by asking you, if that's okay. What has been your DA journey, and what was the motivation or inspiration for what you're currently doing now?
Okay, thank you, Derek. I suppose before I talk about the DA, what I might do very briefly, if it's okay, is explain how I got to be such a believer and so passionate about using a data analytics approach. And that took place really, a long time before I ever joined the DAA. And that goes back to, we're kind of going back to about early noughties, like around 2003 or thereabouts, when it was still a relatively novel concept, and any of the software at the time involved, using the old plug and dongle and that sort of a thing. And I was working with an organization at the time, and my boss then had just invested in data analytics software. It was just the desktop version of ACL, and we were encouraged to use this in all audits. And, I was working on a particular audit which, was expected to be very straightforward. It was a well-respected company in the group. It had won Company of the Year award a number of times, actually. You could see them all when you went into the office. And I was using the software, and it produced some outliers around the relationship between working capital and cash. And it led me to pose some additional questions, shall we say, than I normally would have. And this was a Friday afternoon. And I was posing these questions to the finance director, and he became very visibly uncomfortable and nervous. It was very noticeable. And I was a bit taken aback. I didn't expect this. And this was a Friday afternoon. And when I went back into the office on the Monday morning, the finance director had absconded and was last seen on the run in Spain. So that was a pretty, shall we say, interesting experience, but at least, and it's made me, very, very passionate about the power of what data analytics can do when it's employed effectively in your audits. And anywhere I've worked since that experience, pretty much the first thing I've done is introduce data analytics software. And in the DAA, I introduced it via the desktop version originally. I thought it was better to kind of go with baby steps. And again, the desktop version is a relatively modest cost. We started with one license. Within the first couple of weeks, really, of using this in a procure to pay audit, it had paid for itself. Which is a pretty impressive return on investment by any standards. After that, then we were kind of pushing a bit of an open door, and we ended up, eventually getting direct access to the production client of the ERP systems. And now we run multiple scheduled scripts nightly and weekly and monthly and quarterly, depending on the type of script that it is. And what this has done, really, it's helped to reposition internal audit as a constructive support to the business, as opposed to, the traditional maybe perception that some businesses might have of seeing you as kind of more fault finding. And I think that's been a very positive thing.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm not having a go at your age or anything like that, but I think as we pass a certain number of years in internal audit, we have these major milestone moments in our audit career, but we see something completely different, unexpected, but it changes how we think about things going forward.
Absolutely.
In your case, that was a Very interesting afternoon you must have spent that Friday afternoon. Thank you for that.
It was what you might call formative, and
Yes.
I must say, I'm extremely grateful to my boss at the time who had the foresight to invest in the data analytics software.
Yeah. So again, I say, as we go through our career, I think we have a few moments like that, don't we? Caroline, I'm going to turn to yourself now, if you don't mind. Just your journey, where are you, and your inspiration? And I think I know who your inspiration is, to be honest.
Thanks, Derek. Yes, my analytics journey started really with a problem, and it was a classic problem of doing more with less. At the time, I was the sole member of my audit department with a full university to audit at the bottom of a recession. And I suppose at that time, I had an audit committee who felt very strongly that key processes had to be audited annually. So your typical purchases, procurement, payroll, and that didn't leave me with very much room on my audit plan for some of the emerging risks that I saw coming down the track. So the solution for me at that time was to put in place a continuous auditing program, which would see us look at those kind of key processes on a more real-time basis. And the real enabler for that was data analytics. So how did I start that journey? Well, I was lucky enough to attend an IIA event that Kevin was speaking at, and realised that Kevin was further along that journey with continuous auditing and data analytics. And I was very lucky to be able to visit with Kevin and the guys in the DAA and see the great things they were doing out there with ACL. At that time, ACL was available really only on-prem, and we didn't really have the resources or the staff to roll out our program at ACL, but it definitely was the inspiration for the program I put in place in the university. But our tool of choice at that stage was Excel, and it was a very effective tool. A lot of the things we were looking to do, we could do with Excel, and it was very helpful in establishing that program. But if I roll on to where I am today and on Post, I suppose the challenge this time came from the business itself. The challenge to audit was to move at the pace of the business. So a business going through a huge digital transformation, really looking to harness the power of data in that organization. And so we find ourselves now working in collaboration with the business as it goes on that journey of getting the most out of data. So that's why it's so important for us now to embed data analytics into what we do in our program. So equally, and on Post, we've established a continuous auditing program, and it sees us now use the company's own analytics tools, which means we're now in a position to work with the business, develop out the continuous auditing program with a view to eventually transitioning it over to business as a continuous monitoring tool within the business. So it's really positioning us at the heart of the business, working collaboratively with the business and helping us achieve our strategy, which is becoming a trusted advisor of the business. So analytics has really been the lever for all those programs.
Thanks, Caroline. I'm just sorry, everybody, I forgot to take myself off mute there, which is something I should know much better about. Interesting journey and inspiration from somebody else. So one of the messages I'll always talk about is, let's collaborate. If we can collaborate, we always learn something from somebody else, and that benefits, and it shortens the journey for us as well. Thank you, Caroline. Shehryar, I wonder what your perspective is in your journey so far.
Hey, Derek. Thank you. Thanks for the invite to this panel. I think my journey has been in a way that I've always been connected to data analytics from the very start when I started off in IT audit. I'm a software engineer by qualification, but when I joined audit, I was in one way or another always connected to data analytics in terms of delivering it. But I'd like to come to the more recent past, whereby we launched data analytics at Lloyds Banking Group, and I'd want to talk about that journey. So I was actually given the responsibility to roll out the strategy about 3.5 years back. And in terms of our journey, we've come from a position of very little or no analytics usage to advanced and extensive use of cutting edge analytics techniques. So much so that we won the IA award for the best use of technology in 2018. We've come from a position where we used advanced analytics on about 6% of the audits to about over 50% of the audits now. We've got a dedicated data analytics audit team, whereby when I started off, there wasn't a separate team. It was just 3 colleagues. Now it's a team of 16 in a function of 300 people. We've come from a place where we struggle to use some basic analytics on Excel to the use of supervised and unsupervised machine learning, natural language processing, and process mining on our audits. We use analytics regularly on program and governance audits, something that was almost unimaginable a few years back, at least for us. Mandatory data analytics trainings there for all colleagues, and we've got multiple programs to upskill colleagues. Use of analytics is actually part of our function's balance scorecard, performance metric, so to speak, for the function. So in terms of the motivation, what was the motivation? Our vision was to be a leading internal audit function. And we knew in order to achieve that vision by our chief internal auditor, we had to be a data-driven function. We knew that we could no longer rely on a sample of 25 to provide sufficient assurance in an environment where millions of transactions are processed in a day. That gave us the impetus to come up with a data analytics strategy, which, apart from technology and process, focused on changing hearts and minds. And for me, that has been the most important part of the strategy.
Apologies, everybody, again. That's me not taking myself off mute. I don't want to do it again. I'll have to sack myself from this session. Thank you, Shehryar. I think the last comment for me particularly resonates here. It's a hearts and minds game, this, isn't it? Every audit team I've ever worked with, in many circumstances, the team will have absolute advocates for this subject, and at the other end of the spectrum, people who are not quite sure what the value is here. They absolutely use it, but they're not quite sure what the next step is. So it is very much about a team game and the hearts and minds. I'll come back to some points at the end of the session here, because I'm taking notes as we go, relevant comments, which I think are worth summarising at the end. I'm going to do a theme reminder just now for everybody. If you're just joining us, welcome to our live stream Talk to Internal Audit with myself, Derek Jamieson, Director of Regions for the Institute. Today's theme is all about data analytics and why it's not negotiable. I'm joined by my 3 guests, Caroline, Kevin and Shehryar. And I'm now going to start asking the second question, which I'm hoping is a very quick answer. And if I can just have a nod of heads briefly, I think the answer is no to this. Would you go back and do work without the data analytics you do just now? I think the answer is going to be no. Kevin, just one word from you, yes or no?
Definitely not. Sorry, that's
Caroline?
two.
That's 2. Caroline?
No.
And for the sake of the completeness here, Shehryar?
Absolutely not.
Absolutely not. So I just thought I'd make the point, none of us would go backwards. It's all about going forward. It's always been about going forward here. So if we wouldn't go backwards, for those of you who haven't got as far as Shehryar, for example, let's go forwards. Let's aspire to the artificial intelligence. Let's aspire to machine learning and things like that, if it's appropriate for our business and our organisation. But let's move forward on this subject. It's vitally important. So thank you for the second answer to the second question. I'm going to just move on to how you actually apply data analytics in your day-to-day work. And I've listed a few phases of the audit activity, if you like. So we've got audit universe development, we've got audit planning for individual audits, we've got actual testing, we've got providing insights rather than looking backwards in terms of what used to happen in compliance against rules. We've got providing insights on future trends and future impacts. And we've also got the potential for providing insights on helping the organisation deliver its strategy. So there are different points, different levels of how audit does its work. And on those headings, I'm not asking everybody on this call to actually answer every point, but I'm going to go to Caroline first on this one. Any of those headings resonate for you in terms of where you get value from data analytics?
Absolutely. I suppose it's about embedding it throughout the whole process of the audit journey. So one of the key areas for us at the moment is around risk assessment and risk-based planning. in particular around our branch network. So we're trying to take a risk-based approach to planning audits in that space. And we're using data analytics to identify critical risk indicators and using them to develop a risk-based sampling model for our branch network, which will direct our audits. So it's been very useful in that space. And we're working in close cooperation with the business, because some of the critical risk indicators that we're building out as part of our risk assessment are also very valuable from a monitoring perspective in the business. So we're actually helping them as we also go on our journey, to better risk-based modelling.
Thanks, Caroline. Share an example from yourself. Which part of the sequence of audit activities I was talking about particularly resonate for you?
So, Derek, we use some level of analytics across all the areas that you mentioned in terms of audit planning, risk assessment, providing insights. I believe a large part of analytics delivery is still as part of audit planning or audit fieldwork. As I mentioned before, we use a number of various techniques to draw insights, not necessarily for controls testing, which is what traditionally analytics had been used for, but more to draw insights, draw out trends that would help us focus our audit at the right scope, at the right level. That's been hugely useful for us. And going into future, I think we could think about some sort of predictive analytics, but again, not for controls testing, but more about focusing our audits or focusing the scope of the audit.
Great, thank you, Shehryar. I'm actually going to ask you a second question. It goes back to your previous comments and about performance metrics for the audit team. So in my previous life, we set objectives for individuals to say that you must apply, probably a bit too dictatorial if I'm actually reflecting on it now, that you must apply data analytics on this audit, and this audit. Just a quick question, if I may, please, around that, Shehryar. How have you found that's gone down with the team actually applying a requirement, if you like?
So, Derek, I think the whole journey's been a bit of a push and a pull. Mm-hmm. The push is the use of metrics, and we didn't use the metrics we did use the metrics from the start when we started the strategy, but with time, we actually increased the level of analytics we needed. So we started off from 15% to 20 to 25 to 50. So there was a progressive increase. But as I said, it can't just be the metrics that drive the use of analytics. That helped out with the initial rollout of metrics, but then it's more of a sell to the auditors. When they can see the amount of impact they can add, some really great stuff that Caroline and Kevin have mentioned, when they see those wow moments, when the stakeholders are actually really impressed with what we've come about, that's when they really buy into the use of analytics, and they just use it not by compulsion, but by choice.
Great, thank you, Shehryar. That helps an awful lot from my perspective. I think just to underline the message, I think it's not about telling people you must, it's about showing and sharing and actually helping them change their thought process. And it gathers momentum as a result. And the measure, in some senses, I think, Shehryar, is more about celebrating the movement and progression of it rather than pushing it hard in a negative sense. So thank you very much for that. Kevin, back to yourself. I'm particularly interested, if you can focus on this. I don't know if you can. We'll find out in a second. On how you use it. But how do you use DA? Do you use DA in supporting development of the audit universe? Just as a first question on that side of it.
To a certain extent, but more on the planning of the audit.
Right. Yeah.
Like really, because again, our audit universe, obviously it will change, but on a year-to-year basis, it won't change enormously unless we've had a number of acquisitions or embarked on new joint ventures. Yeah. But on the planning stage, really, it's very, very useful, because at that stage, we approach the audit and we say, look, can we write scripts here that would help to automate testing or to expedite testing? And if it is any type of an audit on the procure to pay cycle, or say anything on the revenue assurance side, for sure it'll be a data analytics led approach where we can do 100% testing and zone in on outliers. Sometimes the approach and whether or not we use DA will be driven partly by the quality of information that we could get from a particular system. So for instance, anything that involves an ERP system, for sure, 100%, it would be a data analytics led audit. Some of the older legacy type systems, the quality of the output you can get from them can be a bit problematic. So the test for us really, I suppose, is that if we can get the output in a, say, pipe delimited format, you know, for sure, data analytics led approach, you know, because we can get millions of lines of data extracted into that with relative ease. If the system would only facilitate it into other formats, you know, we have to revisit how we may approach the audit. But essentially, if we can get to format the extract in, you know, either Excel, CSV, TXT for more limited populations of data, or delimited format, pipe delimited format rather, for, you know, vast swathes of data, then for sure it's going to be data analytics led. Great, thank you very much.
I'm actually going to come back to Caroline again. Apologies for getting on the hop there, Caroline. At the very beginning, Kevin gave, I suppose, the best example to me for a while in terms of the epiphany you might have had on a Friday afternoon with somebody at the other side of the table wondering what's going to happen next. Have you had anything similar in your career?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And only recently we were sharing a discussion around how best to use data analytics in a purchase to pay environment, and we were sharing stories recently, and someone shared a story that they were using process mining, and that was a light bulb moment for me, because, you know, that's the future, I think, of where we need to go with our continuous auditing program, is getting hold of that background process data, mining it, so I never again have to take a sample of 25 and do a walkthrough test. I can now see the exceptions to the process, use process mining. And I mean, to me, that's the future of looking at these more stable everyday processes within the organization, and you know, and trying to automate that piece, so that my team can then look at the anomalies and the outliers with the business, and then also freeing up space again on that audit plan to look at the more evolving risks coming down the line at us, so that we are bringing foresight to the business by freeing up our team from, you know, those kind of laborious walkthroughs.
And thank you for the comment about never wanting to do 25 again. I think that might be an aspiration. I think that we should all probably have as internal auditors, how to get away from that routine 10, 15, 20, 25, which are very valuable in their own right, but in the current world and in the future, would we really want to have that on a day-to-day basis? I don't think the answer is yes. I don't think it can be yes, to be honest. I'm going to give one very quick example, and it's very basic, I suppose, in response to the point on how does data analytics help strategic planning. And it's an example, I certainly won't give names here, of a small air organisation who had come up with their strategy for the next 5 years, and it was predicated very much on their view that there was a whole chunk of market to go after, and a whole range of potential customers to grab. And the audit team, and I wasn't in this team, but I do know them, the audit team was doing a piece of work around the process to support development of the strategy, not trying to challenge whether the strategy was right or not, obviously, but just trying to understand that there was substance to what was going on paper as the strategy. And very, very briefly, they did some different work in terms of trying to just confirm that this market pitch that the organisation was coming with was valid. Where did you get the information from that talked about the size of the market? How many customers do we have versus how many could we have? Where's the locations? And within about 2 days, apparently, having put together different bits of information in a spreadsheet, they identified that the organisation only had half the opportunity it thought it had, because they already had more of the market than they realised they had. So the strategy fell over before it was launched. It just wasn't achievable. So effectively, they did challenge the strategy, but by checking the process and doing some very, very simple analytics, comparing other forms of market information, putting them in a spreadsheet, comparing with the customer base and how the customer base was categorised, they found this isn't doable. And not only that, the reason for it, one of the reasons for that wrong strategy was the customer classification in the organisation system was wrong. So customers have been misclassified. As a result, the organisation thought it had more to go for, and it didn't. So an interesting dynamic there, right at the top of an organisation, just to give an example. Kevin and Caroline, sorry, Kevin first, if you don't mind. What's next in your DA journey? What's the next step up or the next aspiration for you?
We're looking at doing a lot more on the ratio analysis type of approach, you know, where we're looking at things like measures of central tendency, variations in terms of the skewness of data, all of that sort of thing that we do currently, but we expect to ramp it up significantly in the next year or thereabouts, particularly for the overseas entities where it's, you know, maybe difficult to travel to because of COVID and all of that over the next 6 to 12 months. We've had you know, a good bit of success in that area so far, but I see us being able to do an awful lot more in that space for particularly those overseas entities.
A view from yourself, Caroline?
Yeah, so for us, it's really building out that continuous auditing program with OnPost, working with the business, using the analytics tool within the business, in particular, building out better monitoring around key risks, and getting into the machine learning space with the powerful tool that we have in OnPost, and then using that for much more dynamic risk planning as part of our audits, like Kevin mentioned.
Thanks, Caroline. Shehryar, I think I'm going to ask you to give me 2 examples, if you don't mind, because you're talking from an organisation that is doing quite a lot of stuff at the more advanced level, if you like. So if you could give me, and I don't know if you can, but if you could give me something at the top end of the analytics scale, if you like, and anything else maybe slightly further down the maturity scale. Any examples?
Yeah, Derek, we've got several examples of analytics analytics being used to lead to a high visibility finding with direct customer impact, and so on and so forth. But I'd like to use an example whereby we used a really advanced data analytics technique. As I reflected, we do use natural language processing, which is a form of advanced text analytics, and machine learning, as well as process mining. And these in their own right can be quite useful, but the real power is when you bring all of these techniques together. And that's the example I want to mention. So sometime back, we actually used artificial neural networks to actually generate a finding. Sometime back, as part of an incident management audit, we used NLP, or natural language processing, on the instance data with an overlay of supervised machine learning. So we used NLP to draw correlation between the description of an event and how it was classified, and trained an algo based on prior year's data to identify that classification. And then we ran that algo on the current year's data, which was the audit period. And that actually helped us identify some really useful insights we took to the business. But more importantly, we were able to demonstrate to the business a really efficient way of actually classifying their own data, which was quite useful to them. Then there is another example of us actually recreating the functionality of an electronic communications surveillance tool. So we almost recreated the alerting functionality of that tool and identified some impactful insights in terms of the population of users that were being captured by the surveillance tool, and also how the lexicon was set up, how the tool was set up. And that was really powerful. And the interesting thing is we were able to do that within a couple of weeks of getting the data. So it wasn't sort of months-long process whereby we had to, think about it and devise something elaborate. once your people get upskilled on some of these tools, such as Python, such as R, you can spin these things up very, very quickly if you apply it to the right use case.
Tremendous, Shehryar. I'll be quite honest, some of that I don't quite understand, but that demonstrates that I'm at a different place in my DA journey. But it also gives me appetite to understand more. And I hope for those of you who are watching this afternoon, the same is happening to you. Please, please do not think there's somebody talking at a different level I can't aspire to. Please look the other way at it and say, I'd love to get there. What is it? I'm not 100% sure yet, but I'd love to get there. So I'm not being disparaging when I say that, Shehryar, you just demonstrated to me there's a different level I need to get to in my understanding. And that's what this is all about for me, having a chat with people about their different perspectives on data, what they're doing within their own worlds, and inspiring, hopefully, thought processes. I loved, nobody knows this yet apart from Kevin and Caroline, I loved when I spoke to Caroline a couple of weeks ago and she said what inspired her was Kevin a number of years ago. I think that is absolutely what this institute's all about, talking amongst ourselves with a purpose. The purpose is to help each other get better. Caroline, I'm actually going to go back on that inspiration point, if you like, and I don't want to push it too much. I don't want Kevin to have too big a head here. But if you hadn't had that conversation, if you hadn't heard what Kevin had to say, would you be as far down the track as you are now?
No, I definitely wouldn't be. You know, data analytics can have this mystique about it, and it's only when you actually reach out and see people doing practical everyday things that begins to be dispelled. And I think, you know, that day going over to the DA and sitting with Kevin and his analyst, seeing how the ACL scripts operate, seeing the type of insights you get when you apply them across key processes, you know, and I was able to take that learning away and not necessarily use an ACL tool to do it, but use the principles to design out the continuous auditing using Excel. And that was a key game changer. And then to be able to bring that now to An Post with tools and elevate it to the next level has been key to my journey too.
Thank you very much. Kevin, I'm giving you warning. I'm going to come to you in a minute or so, just after your head stops swelling so much with that compliment I gave you. I'm going to come to you and just ask you for a little bit of perspective on how you get around stakeholders who are not too sure what you're doing when you want to take data from them. I'll come back to you on that and I might explain it a bit more at that point. But back to Shehryar for a second, if I may. Again, I wasn't being disparaging when I was saying I didn't understand everything you were saying. I'm just trying to make a point that I need to understand more and emphasize that to everybody else. Do you find that within the team though, that when you're talking, sometimes you're talking on a different planet, different language, and how do you get around that if you do?
So I think, Derek, it's actually been a journey, right? When we, and it's good you making the point that these things shouldn't be thought of as, you know, totally out of reach. When we started off the journey 3.5 years back, if you'd asked me, Shehryar, do you want to be using machine learning? I probably won't have an answer for you, right? So the key thing is we've taken the rest of the function on that journey with us. The first thing for them to know is the art of the possible, what can be done, right? The tools, I mentioned we had a strategy with 3 pillars: people, process, and technology. And I said, people being the most important part of that strategy. It's actually taking them, bringing them along that journey. The first day when we started off, we didn't start off with the use of Python or R or supervised machine learning. We just went for full population testing. So for people who are starting their journey, rather than getting intimidated by what's required, I'd say they need to take those baby steps. They need to just get hold of, shall I call it, the low-hanging fruit, just making sure when you're not doing data analytics, you need to ask yourself, why not? If I've got 10,000 records, transactions to go through, why aren't we using analytics, and why are we taking a sample? And with time, we've been able to bring the team up to that level where, I won't say all of them, but most of them understand that fine, we've got committee packs, we've got these huge documents of 70 pages each with about 200 of those. We can use NLP to draw out key topics and all. And we continue to do that, actually. We continue to do these presentations and sort of, I'd say sort of road shows for people to understand what's there and what's the art of the possible.
And before I let you go, Shehryar, when we spoke a couple of weeks ago in preparation for this, you mentioned that you've been speaking to management or doing a presentation to management, and they made a comment about surprise that Internal Audit were doing something. Do you recall that?
Yeah, that's that's interesting. I was called to present on our journey to a team in the business, and that was an analytics team as well. And after I was done with the presentation, they said, well, it's a surprise. It's coming from internal audit. That's not where you typically look to for innovation. But I think we in internal audit have this fabulous platform and a unique opportunity whereby every audit is like an experiment. You just got to be bold enough to try the hypothesis through the use of analytics. Things such as process mining that we talked about. I've actually done several presentations on our use of process mining to the business, and a lot of them are still surprised by what we're doing because they don't do that at all.
Thank you, Shehryar. Just about to come to you, Kevin, but just before I come to you, just to summarise what I hear when I hear Shehryar talking there, this is internal audit moving into a position where quite often we haven't been in the past, inspiring the organisation, leading the thought process on something, as a minimum, looking different and looking interesting, and people want to engage on that, particularly if we come up with something new and different and insightful. So Shehryar, thank you very much for that. Kevin, back to yourself for that flagged question, if you don't mind, in terms of stakeholder response and how you get them through that door of acceptability, if you like.
Sure. Actually, if I may briefly, Derek, before I get on that, whilst I'm very, very appreciative of the compliments Caroline and everything has given, I do want to emphasize that I'm only able to do this work because I've got a very strong data analytics manager, Barry Power at present, and also his predecessors were exceptionally strong as well. So, again, my job then as the head of the department is to ensure that, they get the right direction and the right tools to do the work. But I do want to emphasize very clearly, I'm not taking credit for all of this. It's because I have had a very strong data analytics people in the team. So if I onto your question then, Derek. Yeah, in terms of getting the stakeholders, yes, a lot of them can be a bit skeptical at the start. And a lot of them, they may have preconceived ideas of what internal audit is and what it can do, and can offer. So what I find is that, once you have discussed the results of a particular data analytics driven audit with them, on one or two occasions, it tends to change their perception, because one of the great things about data analytics approaches is that it gets rid of all these kind of would, could, should type of rationalizations that you get from people trying to explain away, an exception or what may have arisen in an audit. I mean, you've done 100% testing. The truth is in the data. It's very hard to argue with facts. So that is one thing. It pretty much kind of bulldozes away those excuses. The other thing I find is that it impresses people with the volume of work that you're able to get through. I mean, for instance, even with the current environment, with COVID and everybody kind of working from home, in some parts of everybody's businesses, there may have seen dips in productivity. I mean, I've had executives say to me that you guys in audit, you haven't been impacted at all by COVID, have you? Your output is the same as it ever was. It's slightly higher in some areas. They're kind of amazed at that, really, and that actually is proof of the effectiveness of the data analytics approach. I feel really, There has been definitely areas where we've been able to produce very, very telling insights, which have led to, business processes having, been changed very significantly and led to, for further changes across the organization. So, I think once you get a few early wins, you tend to be pushing an open door after that, really.
Great, thank you for that, Kevin. It just re-emphasises that there's value in this. Is once your stakeholder, who might be cynical or a bit defensive, once they see it, once they understand it, the door's open after that, because we can do something. And I'm saying we collectively can do something that they haven't necessarily been able to do or perceived that we could do ourselves. And it is about sharing as well with them. Just another theme reminder for everybody who's with us. If you're just joining just now, welcome to our live stream, Talk to Internal Audit, with myself, Derek Jamieson, Director of Regions for the Institute. Today's theme is very much about data analytics and why it isn't negotiable for internal audit. We've had a few discussions and a few questions and answers regarding data analytics, and we're now moving to summarising for the last few minutes here. So back to some questions, one last question to each of you, if I may. Quite often our attendees say, what can I do tomorrow? What's practical? What can I do as I leave this session? We'll go back to work tomorrow. Shehryar, have you got a couple of pointers, a couple of practical hints and tips for people?
Yeah, Derek, I think for people starting their journey, one thing I'd recommend is that you need to take small steps. You need to walk before you run, right? So use of already available tools, things such as Excel, and then there are other tools that are freely available as well, adds a lot of impact. So you need to have a strategy in terms of how you get everybody to use the tools, firstly. Because in smaller teams, you won't, I'm in a fortunate position to have a big team, but it is because it's a big function, it's a big department. In smaller teams, it's not about having a number of data analytics SMEs, but it's almost getting everybody to do some level of data analytics. Now, in this day and age, when year 8 kids are actually learning Python as part of their curriculum, I think it's almost inconceivable that a few years going forward we won't have analytics skills. The second thing I'd say is that in audit we tend to be quite risk averse by nature. We should move away from that fear of failure and shouldn't hesitate to try new things and be ready to accept that every experiment that we try won't succeed. But each one that is a success will actually take us forward in terms of innovation. So be brave and be innovative.
Thank you, Shehryar. I'm going to leave the ladies till last. So Kevin, yourself, please, if you don't mind.
Sure. I think what I would say to people is that it's easier to start than you might think, in the sense that, one can start, say, with the desktop version, and the desktop version is of any of the data analytics software models that are out there. It's fairly modest cost, really. And if you focus on that, on areas like the payables, accounts payable, procurement areas, where, in any organization, no matter how tight the controls are, if you run that software, the first time, you're gonna find some duplicates, you're gonna find some inefficiencies. So you'll get early wins and you'll be able to demonstrate a fairly quick return on investment, which should be able to push the case to go further. Another key driver, I would say, though, is that as early as possible, you need to be getting access to the data yourself. It doesn't work and it's not efficient if you're waiting for someone in IT to give you a big data extract. When you do that, you're asking someone who doesn't report to you to do a job for you. And it's not going to be a priority. You need to be able to have access to all of the ERP and all other legacy type systems in your organization, and don't be shy about asking for access, I would say.
Thank you, Kevin. A very, very practical one there. I think everybody recognises the challenge of getting data sometimes from disparate systems and different parts of the organisation, some more open than others, and some more busy than others, to be honest. Sure. Caroline, I might have made it more difficult by putting you last, but do you have a couple of examples?
Yeah, well, for me, first and foremost is, just do it. You are doing it. You think you're not using data analytics, you are using it. If you use Excel, you're using it. If you look at these common processes like purchases and payables, you're probably doing it already. I probably echo what Kevin says. It is all about getting the data, getting very familiar with the data. And actually, that's one of the things that the business have said back to us is, I didn't realize internal audit were the experts on all these data sets around the organization. And I think that that's key. I equally would say collaboration with the business and outside. If I hadn't, lifted the phone to Kevin, I may not be where we are today on the journey with analytics. So yeah, you are doing it, keep doing it, and collaborate would be my message.
Thank you, Caroline. That last word was essential for me. It just led me in perfectly to the next piece. I did take some notes as we went through this, and I'm not going to expand, but some key words that I picked up during the course of the chat: repositioning internal audit. There's a whole range of examples given there about how we can change our profile and positioning within the organisation and move from, I'll call it old school internal audit, if you like, to a different model going forward. People see that, people want it. I don't think I've ever met an internal audit function that isn't wanted when they perceive to be changing like that. The epiphany moment, I keep using that with data analytics, when something happens that transforms in your mind how this thing works for you and what it can do for you going forward. Kevin, your example at the beginning for me was the epiphany of the day. So thank you for that. Talking to your peers, getting inspiration, getting the help and collaboration. That word collaboration will come back again in a second. The movement, Shehryar, you mentioned from 6 to 50% of use on audits, if you like. It's that progression. We can't go from 0 to 100 in 2 minutes. It's a progression. And as you said, Shehryar, it's not about measuring with a stick. It's measuring to demonstrate progress and celebrate success and create motivation for the future. Somebody touched on IA award winners. I think it was again you, Shehryar. We have an awards ceremony every year. Innovation for internal audit isn't all about data analytics, but surely there's a lot about data analytics that we can do across the profession and really celebrate progress on. So if anyone's thinking about applying to having an award next year, or the Internal Audit Awards, Risk and Audit Awards next year, think about data analytics and what you've been doing as an organisation and how much better you've become as a result of it. And the last one for me was experiment. You're absolutely right. We don't tend to be a function that likes to take too many risks. We like to manage and mitigate risk, but take the experiment journey because that's the only way we develop. And we can develop quite substantially when we make a mistake and learn from it, but also when we have the success of experimenting as well. The word collaboration has come up a few times, and I'm going to use it another couple of times in the last minute or so. I'm going to talk about something the Institute initiated a couple of weeks ago, and it didn't initiate it from me having an idea. It initiated it from heads of audit turning up at our Heads of Audit virtual forum a few weeks ago on a Wednesday afternoon when we had a presentation from 2 heads of audit on data analytics and what they were doing. It's fair to say there was a wow in there at some point in that meeting, and a few heads of audit contacted myself afterwards to say, what was that all about? That was great. That was really good. And both heads of audit got great response to that as well. I asked the question at the end of that forum, does anybody else want to talk about data analytics? And within a day, Caroline was in contact saying, I'd be interested in helping out here. Subsequent to that, 4 other heads of audit got in touch in that second day, and we put together a core group and we created a working group on data analytics. Rather than setting the agenda for that, what we thought we would do is ask people to attend a meeting a couple of weeks ago and tell us what they thought about data, where they are, what they could offer, etc. And the principle of that is collaboration. Everybody, as far as I know, and I'm thinking it is everybody who turned up that day, 91 people from over 70 organisations, came with the same view, I think, a desire to share what they're doing, and the challenges potentially around that and the successes as well, a desire to listen and learn from others to help their own journey, and a desire to collaborate for the benefit of themselves and for everybody else as well. To me, that's what this is all about, collaborating. This subject can move incredibly quickly if we can collaborate a little bit more. For those of us at the bottom of the journey or towards the bottom of the journey, listen to Shehryar and some of the words that I don't understand. that becomes inspirational for me. I have to go and find things out now. It doesn't turn me off at all. It does the opposite. Listen to the epiphany that Kevin had one Friday afternoon, and with the business, we do have these examples taking place. And listen to the inspiration that Kevin can give somebody else. And I accept the point, Kevin, it isn't you, but you lead the function, so credit where it's due and credit to your team as well. To hear that coming through, that's what this is all about. So to any of you listening today or watching today, if you haven't got yourself involved in our data working group, please contact myself. We want to have as many internal audit functions involved in this as possible. As I say, on the 3 points I'm talking about, to share, to listen, and to collaborate. If we can do that, we can really improve what we all do on data analytics. An email will be going out from the Institute to those who've been involved in that first meeting in the next couple of weeks, which will explain our approach going forward. And later today, I'll be talking with that core group about how we're going to try and shape this going forward. If you haven't been involved, please contact me if you wish to become involved. The more people who are involved, the more organisations who are involved, the better we can move this subject forward for the benefit of every organisation. So I'll close now by just asking Caroline very briefly to say once again, would you go backwards in data analytics?
No.
Thank you. Shehryar?
No.
No. Kevin, you can guess the question. What would you do?
No, I wouldn't go backwards.
Thank you very much. So let's all go forwards together. If we do that in the new year, data analytics will really become something that everybody will say is not negotiable at the new level. And what also will be not negotiable is aspiring to get to the next level. So thank you everybody for joining today. Thank you for Caroline, thanks for Kevin, and thank you for Shehryar for joining today and for offering their views and their thoughts on the subject, and being open about their experiences as well. To recap, this episode is actually worth 1 CPE point, so please apply for the CPE point. The chat comment on the screen here just now will help you how to do that. So for the moment, I'll call it a day. I'll call it a day for all of yourselves as well. It's time to have a cup of coffee if you haven't had one already. But thank you very much for joining Talk to Internal Audit, and we'll speak to you again soon. Thank you.